Hello, Shemai, and welcome to my wild Welsh garden. My name's Isabel, and I live here in Wales at the top of the Swansea Valley. I've been a conventional gardener for, all of my life, really. But this year I've decided to become a wild gardener and help more wildlife to find homes in my garden. Well, as you can see, I'm not actually in my garden. I'm sitting in my kitchen and I'm counting birds. And while I was doing that, I thought it might be a good idea to share this with you and also some of the other things that I'm trying to do to help birds to get through this winter. So I'll just turn you around and show you what I can see from here. So in front of me, I've got two big windows that face out over the garden. And then coming round here, I have a side window where I can see the bird table and then round to the Perches. This is the view from my kitchen window. So this is what I can see when I'm standing washing up. I can look out and see all the little birds visiting the bird feeders. And this is what I can see through my back door. If I lean over, I can see all the way up the path that goes up the centre of the garden. And this is the view out of my side window where I can see the bird table. When I filled the feeders, there are always little birds coming to and from the feeders, and also on the ground because they're terribly messy eaters and they drop all sorts of stuff on the ground. So the starlings and the robin and the dunnocks and the wagtails and the collared dove come and feed underneath the bird table. And the reason why I've put the colander underneath is because it does catch quite a lot of the seeds that they chuck out of the seed feeder, and it stops them falling to the ground, because at one point I had a real problem with rats, but since I've used the colanders under the seed feeders, it seems to have sorted that out, which is good. And if you're from the UK, I'm sure you're familiar with the Big Garden Birdwatch. This is run by the RSPB and it takes place just once a year in January. And in this, you spend an hour in your garden or in a space like a park or an allotment, and you count the number of birds that you can see within that hour. Well, there's another organisation called the British Trust for Ornithology, and they run all sorts of bird counts and bird surveys. But the one that I have joined in with this year is called the Garden Bird Watch, and that runs all year, and you count the number of birds that you see in your garden every week. And then you enter the number of birds that you've seen of each species on the website. And the British Trust for Ornithology very helpfully emails me every week to remind me to do this. There's a coal tit there and a nuthatch on the roof and another coal tit. So that's two coal tits. And another coal tit. So that's three together. And that's a great tit, just flown in on the right. When the birds are just in ones and twos like this, or threes, it's quite easy to count them, but sometimes, like when there's half a dozen blue tits all flitting here, there and everywhere, and there's coal tits and great tits as well, it does get a bit difficult. Coal tits and great tits are usually in ones or twos. I usually only see one nuthatch. Blue tits, I can sometimes maybe up to a dozen. I only ever see one robin at a time, and if there are two, then they're fighting. Blackbirds tend to be bigger and slower and more easy to count. The problems arise when I get these flocks of sparrows or starlings over a dozen, and anything over a dozen really, and it does tend to be a bit of a guesstimate. That's a blue tit there, it's just come in on the right and on the left. Oh no, some sparrows have arrived. Just 3 this time. Another coal tit, another blue tit, another sparrow. And the thing to remember if you're feeding birds with bird feeders and bird tables is to keep them clean. Unfortunately, with the bird flu that we've had in the UK, it's been really important that we don't allow our feeding places to be places where this horrible disease is passed on. And of course, if you do see any sick or ill birds, then you really need to stop feeding them. It doesn't happen much up here. In the summer, I noticed a starling that had some horrible growths on his head. It wasn't bird flu, I don't know what it was, but I stopped feeding for a fortnight, and I'd tell my neighbours and ask them to stop feeding as well. And I haven't seen it since, so hopefully we haven't passed it on to any other birds. I think the RSPB recommend that you clean your feeders at least once a week, and I do that by just immersing it in a bucket of warm water with washing up liquid for a few hours and giving them a good scrub, and then rinsing them thoroughly with plain water and drying them off and filling them back up again. And in addition to the food that I buy that I put out for the birds, I also try and provide a lot of natural food. Food like these seed heads here from a Thlictrum, and these teasel seed heads that the goldfinches like, although I think they like rather more than I've got in my garden at the moment. And all these different seed heads in this flower bed here. And all these ivy berries. They're not ripe yet, they're going to turn black, and then the birds can eat them in the winter. Just noticed there's a shield bug sitting on an ivy leaf, and the birds can eat that as well if they want. And these lovely rose hips in the hedge that the birds can come and eat. And lots of places for invertebrates to overwinter, like under logs and stones and leaf mould, leaves that have dropped from the trees. Let's see what's under this stone. Oh, woodlice. Oh, a nice tasty meal for a bird. And this is always a good place to find invertebrates. This is an owl which was made by a local chap who does sculptures out of wood with his chainsaw, and he's got a flat head, so I put a seasonal pot on his head, and that's got the usual sort of summer bedding plants in, which I'll probably just leave over winter and then put some bulbs in the spring. But shall we see what's underneath? Gosh, that's a lot of woodlice. But as well as food, birds need perching places and cover, and there's quite a lot of that in this garden. So there's the shrubs around the bird table here that the little birds hide in, and on the way to the bird table. I've got a number of trees that the birds perch in. That one over there is a silver birch. I only planted it this year and it was considerably taller, but the starlings broke the top off, which won't do it any harm, I don't suppose. Another favourite place to perch and to hide is this shrubby honeysuckle that's growing up the trellis. In fact, there's a couple of sparrows in there at the moment, but yeah, I don't know what they're doing, whether they're hiding or they're finding things to eat, but they do spend quite a bit of time in there, and then they fly from there onto the bird feeders and back again, of course. And then there's plenty of hiding places in these evergreen shrubs. There's a camellia and a holly, and the sparrows particularly hide in there. More perching places on this rambling rose on the trellis. Now, I probably, if I was a conventional gardener, would have pruned this back a bit by now, but because the birds like to perch on it and swing on it and hide in it, I've just left it. I'll do it in the spring. And another thing that's really important for birds, particularly through the winter, is water, because they need to bathe to keep their feathers in good condition, and if their feathers are in good condition, then they're more likely to be able to survive the winter. And so they bathe in here and they drink from here and from there as well. But again, what's really important is to keep these clean, so I clean them out at least once a week, because birds are incredibly dirty things. And this geranium roseanne is still flowering, and there are still bees on it. At the moment, mostly honeybees, but there is a bumblebee. Which has just flown away. Not so much bumblebees and honeybees, but all the other pollinators that visit these flowers are food for birds. All the birds that have come into my garden are all common birds, common garden birds. Some of them, like the sparrows and the starlings, used to be pests. But they're all in decline. And just imagine what it would be like if that decline continues. I mean, just think what it would be like next spring if there was no bird song, if there really was a silent spring. Now, one of the main drivers for the decline in birds is loss of habitat. And I feed the birds for two reasons. One is because I just like watching the birds and their wonderful company. But the other is that there's just not enough food for them to survive the winter because of the loss of habitat. And as winter comes and I spend less time in the garden and more time in my cottage looking out, and there's less insects and less flowers to look at, then the birds kind of take centre stage and they become more important. And the other thing is I can see them better because there are no leaves and the foliage has died down. And the reason why I'm counting the birds in my garden and taking part in this citizen science project run by the British Trust for Ornithology is that it's really important that we have evidence of what's happening to our wildlife. Governments say lots of warm words about looking after the environment. The Welsh Government has an action plan for nature recovery. So, me counting the birds in my garden will help provide the evidence as to whether that action plan is actually working. So, I hope you've enjoyed your visit to my wild Welsh garden. Thanks for watching the video, and I do hope you'll come again. If you'd like to join me on my wilding journey and see what I get up to over the winter and what happens to the wildlife next spring, whether I actually get any more or not, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and I'll see you next time, and I'll leave you with some more birds. Bye! Hwyl am y tro!